The courtroom was carved from stone and silence. Marble floors, oak benches, a chill so clean it felt surgical. Every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, former investors, victims' families, and a few desperate onlookers hoping to glimpse a real-life fall from grace. At the defense table sat Elliot Crane, steel gray suit, silver hair slicked back, hands folded too tightly. The kind of man who once silenced rooms with confidence alone. But today he looked like a ghost of power, hollow, motionless. Visibly sweating beneath his tailored armor, the judge entered. "All rise." Elliot stood. "All parties present?" The judge asked, scanning the room. The prosecutor, smug and polished, nodded. "Ready, Your Honor?" The judge's gaze moved to Elliot's side. "Defense?" Silence. Heads turned. Elliot's jaw twitched. The chair beside him, where Peter Vale, his top-tier attorney, should have been, was empty. Completely empty. No files, no bag, not even a forgotten pen. "Mr. Crane?" The judge repeated. "Where is your counsel?" Elliot cleared his throat. He confirmed last night. Said he'd be here." The judge frowned. "We are not stalling, Mr. Crane. This court has waited 6 months for trial." "If this is a delay tactic, it's not," Elliot snapped. "Too loud, too fast. I don't know where he is." A murmur rippled through the courtroom like a virus, first 2 voices, then a dozen. Whispers of panic, speculation, accusation. Cameras clicked. Journalists scribbled. A woman in the second row, the mother of one of the deceased, shook her head, as if disgust were her only comfort. The prosecutor rose. "Your Honor, the state is prepared to proceed. If the defense has no representation, I have representation." Elliot interrupted again. His voice cracked. "Then where is he?" The judge exhaled. "Bailiff, check the attorney lounge. And get court security on this. If Mr. Vale's absence is deliberate, there will be consequences." Elliot sat back, down, trying not to tremble. His fingers tapped the desk, once, twice, then stopped. In the pit of his stomach, something sank. Not just fear, humiliation. This wasn't just a court case. This was a public execution. And his defense, his armor, his $1,000 an hour legal sword had simply vanished. The prosecutor leaned over to a colleague and whispered, "Maybe even his lawyer knows he's guilty." Across the room, someone stifled a laugh. Elliot glanced at the clock above the judge's bench. Each second felt like a betrayal. Peter Vale had represented senators, tycoons, even a celebrity charged with manslaughter, and now he'd ghosted him. Without warning, something was wrong. This wasn't just negligence. This was surgical disappearance, planned. His eyes scanned the courtroom looking for... what? A hint? A smirk? A face he should recognize? And then he saw her. Near the back. Quiet, almost invisible. A woman in a gray skirt and janitor's badge. Hair pulled into a tight knot. Eyes sharp, watching. Not like a spectator, but like someone waiting for a moment. Their eyes locked for half a second. Then she looked away and kept sweeping. "Where the hell is Peter?" Elliot whispered under his breath. "What is happening?" Before the judge could adjourn for a recess, before security could report back, a voice spoke from the side aisle. "Your Honor?" The voice was calm, clear. Everyone turned. The cleaning lady stepped forward. "I'll defend him." For a moment, no one moved. Then a wave of laughter cracked through the courtroom like a falling mirror. The prosecutor's team chuckled. Reporters scoffed. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Rae Delgado didn't flinch. She stood at the edge of the gallery, her ID badge swinging slightly on a worn black lanyard. Thin-framed glasses, sharp cheekbones, unassuming gray slacks. The kind of person no one noticed until she spoke. "Your Honor," she repeated, her voice steady. "I'm a registered legal intern. Clerked under the firm representing Mr. Crane. If counsel fails to appear, I am within my right to assume emergency representation." Elliot turned slowly, his face pale. He stared at her like she was something conjured from smoke and reel, yet undeniable. "You single quotes Rae ... he asked, barely audible. "I was," Rae replied without looking at him. Judge Morrison leaned forward. "Miss Delgado, this is a class of felony trial. You have no license to argue federal defense. I've assisted in every filing for this." Case, she answered. I've memorized every motion, every deposition. If Mr. Crane's counsel is not present and the trial is forced forward, then I am his last legal protection, and I will not let this courtroom destroy him without one. Silence returned, heavier this time. Judge Morrison tapped her pen, watching Rae like one would inspect a cracked glass, curious whether it would hold or shatter. The bailiff returned. Sir, no sign of Mr. Vale. His office isn't responding. The judge sighed. This day just keeps evolving. The prosecutor rose again, voice like polished stone. Your Honor, this is absurd. She's a glorified paralegal. No, Rae said sharply. I am the only person in this room who's read every page of the discovery file, including the ones you hid behind redactions. Gasps, a few audible gasps. Judge Morrison narrowed her eyes. If I allow this, Miss Delgado. You take full responsibility for defense? Rae stepped forward. Yes, Your Honor, I do. Elliot spoke for the first time in full. Who are you? She turned to him, really turned, and he saw something in her eyes that startled him more than the missing suitcase, the headlines, or even the possibility of prison. Conviction. I'm the intern, she said. You never looked at. He stared, chest heavy with a mix of shame and awe. The judge stood. This court will recess for 30 minutes. When we resume, Miss Delgado will sit as provisional counsel until Mr. Vale is found. If she fails to perform, we will hold her in contempt. Rae nodded once, firm. The judge exited. Rae walked toward the defense table and set her worn messenger bag on the chair. Peter Vale was supposed to occupy. Elliot leaned in. You're serious? She didn't sit. Not yet. Instead, she pulled out a yellow notepad filled with chaotic scribbles and diagrams. You're being set up, she said calmly, and I think I can prove it. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Across the room, the prosecutor's eyes darkened. Rae finally sat. She opened the folder titled, Witness Suppression, Item 4, and with that, the trial of Elliot Crane began again. Long before she stood up in that courtroom, Rae Delgado lived between shadows. By day, she mopped the floors of a law office that didn't know her name. By night, she buried herself in legal textbooks, making flashcards under a flickering desk lamp in her one-bedroom apartment above a liquor store. The air always smelled like bleach and cheap gin. She wore headphones not for music, but to drown out the yelling in the hallway. She'd grown up in a neighborhood where the law arrived only in cuffs, never in suits. Her mother worked 3 jobs until her lungs gave out. Her older brother, gone before she turned 16, caught up in a charge with no real evidence and no real defense. Rae remembered sitting in the back of the courtroom that day, unable to speak, watching a tired public defender fumble through papers and mispronounce her brother's name. She'd made herself a promise that night, never again. Now, years later, Rae had clawed her way into an unpaid internship at Barrett Vale and Associates Elliot Crane's powerhouse legal team. She was the intern they forgot to dismiss, the one who lingered long after the lights dimmed, reading every brief, every line of evidence like it was a code only she could break. She watched Elliot from the edge of the room, always 5 steps behind, always unnoticed. He was polished, powerful, aloof, but she saw the cracks. The tremor in his hands when he signed settlements, the long pauses before he answered questions about the victims, the guilt that lived beneath his perfectly tailored suits. Rae didn't like Elliot, but she understood him. She saw something in his face that mirrored her own father's expression right before the bottle took him for good. That same mix of pride, regret, and fear. Elliot Crane wasn't innocent, but he wasn't evil either, and something about this case didn't add up. She'd read the security reports, the maintenance logs, the autopsy timelines. There was a 3-minute discrepancy so small no one else noticed, but Rae did. That gap could mean sabotage. Could mean a planted system failure, but no one cared what the intern thought. Until now, back in the present, Rae sat alone in a bathroom stall, her hands trembling slightly over her notepad. On the back cover, faded from age and water damage, was a single line scrawled in her own handwriting. When the world ignores you, learn everything it doesn't want you to know. The courtroom was buzzing again, reporters pacing, prosecutors whispering. But Rae focused only on the facts. She'd seen too many men like Elliot fall. Some deserved it. Some didn't. But no one ever stood up to ask why until it was too late. She wouldn't let this be too late. Not because she admired Elliot, not because she wanted to win, but because, for once, she had the knowledge, the tools, the access. And she knew deep down that if she didn't step up, no one would outside. The court assistant called out, 10 minutes to session. Rae folded her notes, stood, and looked at her reflection-tired eyes, pressed blazer, quiet storm. She wasn't supposed to be here, but now that she wasn't going anywhere. Elliot Crane sat in the back of his armored SUV, staring at his reflection in the tinted window as his name scrolled across 3 news tickers. Negligence trial, tech mogul under fire after deadly system collapse. Elliot Crane's net worth slashed by $2.1 billion. Public demands justice for victims of the Orion Mall incident. His phone buzzed endlessly, board members panicking, investors withdrawing. Someone from PR had sent a new strategy memo titled, If Convicted? He didn't open it. His empire built on precision, reputation. Power wasn't just bleeding. It was disintegrating in real time. Employees ghosted him. Former partners turned evasive. Even his own lawyer had vanished without explanation, and no one could find him, not his assistant. Not even the state bar. All he had now was an intern, a girl whose name he hadn't known until she stood up and offered to save him. At first, he'd been amused, then curious. Now? He was afraid because Rae Delgado was quiet but dangerous. Back at her apartment, Rae sat surrounded by case files and printouts, a cup of stale coffee growing cold beside her. She'd been up all night reviewing blueprints, court depositions, and system audit logs from the Orion Mall. Disaster, the very incident that killed 3 people and landed Elliot on trial. There it was again. The details she couldn't shake. A signed work order dated March 14th, authorizing bypass of a safety override in the ventilation system. It bore Elliot's signature, but Rae had checked Elliot's travel logs. On March 14th, he wasn't even in the country. She pulled the magnified signature overlay again. Slight curve in the E, the loop was wrong. The line drag was inconsistent with his usual pressure pattern. It was a forgery. Someone was framing Elliot, or he was covering something up. Either way, it changed everything. The next morning, Rae brought the evidence into the office. Elliot was already, their shirt rumpled, tie gone, glass of scotch untouched beside his laptop. You weren't in the country on March 14th, she said, placing the documents in front of him. His eyes flicked to the papers. Then to her, cold, calculating. I never signed that, he said flatly. She nodded. I know. They stared at each other for a moment. She expected gratitude. But instead, Elliot's posture shifted. His shoulders squared. His gaze sharpened. What else are you digging into? He asked. Rae didn't blink. Everything. Be careful, he said. Curiosity breaks more than just careers. There it was, the threat, casual, elegant, veiled in civility. The first real crack in Elliot Crane's composed facade. She left the room without another word, but outside his office she paused. Her breath shook. Not from fear, but from the confirmation that whatever she'd stumbled into was far bigger than corporate negligence. Back in the SUV that night, Elliot sat with his legal pad, scribbling possible witness list, timelines, exit strategies. But Rae's name was now circled twice, underlined once, because Rae Delgado wasn't just trying to save him. She was uncovering something he'd buried. And if she kept going, she might just unearth the one secret that could finish him. The courthouse library was nearly empty that evening, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Rae sat at a corner table, documents spread before her like a puzzle no one else wanted to solve. She wasn't looking at the case anymore, at least not directly. She was looking at the lawyer who had vanished, Peter Vale, high-powered defense attorney, expensive suits, tenacious in court, known for never walking away from a client. But he'd walked away from Elliot Crane. No, he'd vanished. Not fired. Not reassigned. Disappeared. She dug deeper. Bar association filings, lease agreements, travel records. Bank transfers, and there it was, a transfer of $450,000, wired to a private account in the Cayman Islands 2 days before the trial began. The sender? A shell company, registered under a name Rae had seen before, on a subcontractor document. From Elliot's offshore engineering division. Her blood ran cold. The next morning, Rae slipped into the courthouse copy room. It was the one place nobody noticed anyone where paralegals whispered gossip and traded case updates between paper jams. That's where she found him. Tomas Greer, a paralegal who'd worked under Peter Vale for 5 years. She cornered him with calm force. What happened to Vale? He flinched. I don't know. You do, she said softly. You were there when the trial prep ended. He hesitated, eyes flicking to the hallway. Then leaned closer. Look, he whispered. I heard Peter on the phone with someone from Elliot's camp, he said. This isn't defense work anymore. It's containment. Rae froze. Tomas added. The next day he cleared out his office. Didn't even take his frame degrees. Was he threatened? Tomas exhaled. I think either they paid him to run or they scared him into silence. Same difference. He walked away before Rae could ask more. That night, Rae stood in her apartment, staring at a corkboard cluttered with case notes, diagrams, timelines. The red thread between Elliot and Peter Vale now looped directly through a bank account and back again. She sat down, slowly. Was she defending an innocent man? Or protecting a manipulative genius who could make people vanish? Back in Elliot's office, he stared out the window at the city skyline, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, he said. She's digging too deep. Pause. No, not yet. But if she finds the Zurich file... A knock interrupted him. Rae entered, holding a manila folder. Thought you should see this, she said. He took the file without looking at her. Thanks. She turned to leave. Rae, he said suddenly. She stopped. If you ever feel like you're in over your head, walk away. Her fingers tightened around the doorknob. I've drowned before, she said. This time I learned to swim. She left, not looking back, but her heart thundered with questions. Was Elliot trying to protect her, or warning her not to get too close to the truth? One thing was clear: Peter Vale didn't run on fear alone. Someone had pulled the strings, and Rae was now tangled in them. The church basement smelled faintly of old paint and instant coffee. Folding chairs creaked as people shifted, arms crossed, eyes guarded. Rae stood at the front, legal pad in hand, trying not to tremble. She had agreed to this meeting to gather statements, an effort to humanize the case. But she wasn't ready for what met her. 12 families, 12 names, 12 lives buried under the concrete skeleton of a collapsed mixed-use building on Eddington Street. The building was owned on paper by a third-party developer, but the permits, the materials, the structure, all traced back to Elliot Crane's construction subsidiary. A mother with gray streaks in her braids stood first. Her voice cracked before it rose. My son, Amari, was a janitor in that building. 20 years old, he'd just gotten engaged. Her fingers clutched a wallet-sized photo. When the third floor came down, they didn't find him until the next day. They pulled his body out with a forklift. Rae didn't speak, a man in the back stood next. My daughter lived on the top floor. She used to say she loved the view. That view buried her. Each voice built like a rising tide, swallowing Rae's breath. One wave at a time. They didn't scream. They didn't ask for vengeance. They wanted truth. She could barely hold her pen. Teenage boy stepped forward, holding a cracked phone. This is the last photo I have of my mom, he said, showing Rae the screen. A blurry picture of a smiling woman in scrubs, holding a paper coffee cup. I waited 6 hours for her to come home that day, he whispered. They said the walls folded like paper. The room fell into a heavy silence, then the grieving mother from before walked directly to Rae. She looked her in the eye. You're defending him? I'm representing the truth, Rae replied, voice thin. His truth or ours? Rae swallowed. I don't know yet, the woman nodded slowly. Well, you better find out, because his money killed my son. And no courtroom is gonna change that. That night, Rae sat behind the wheel of her parked car outside her apartment. Rain trickled across the windshield. Her breath fogged the glass. Her hands trembled around the steering wheel. She thought of their faces, of the photo, of the boy, of the phrase, "His money killed my son." And for the first time since she stood in that courtroom, Rae cried. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't poised. It was ugly, shuddering grief, the kind that doesn't belong to you but buries itself in your bones anyway. This case was never about legal victories anymore. It was about ghosts, about lives reduced to exhibits and timelines. She wiped her face, took one breath, then another. In the passenger seat sat a stack of court transcripts and engineering reports. One page caught her eye, a delivery record of concrete batches. Rae narrowed her eyes. The timestamp didn't match the permit date. Her tears slowed and her focus sharpened. The victims deserved more than tears. They deserved a reckoning, and maybe, just maybe, she could still give it to them. Rae stepped into the marble-tiled courthouse hallway, clutching a folder full of case notes, her mind still replaying the faces of the victims. She hadn't slept in 2 nights. Every page, every timestamp, every discrepancy in the documents kept tugging at her like a thread unraveling something larger. Then just as she turned toward the exit, someone stepped out of the shadows, a woman. Mid-40s, with sharp cheekbones and tired eyes. Dressed in black slacks and a navy trench coat, she looked like someone trying not to be noticed and failing spectacularly. Her voice was calm, almost cold. "You don't know who he is?" "Not really," Rae blinked. "Excuse me? Elliot Crane, my brother." Rae froze. "Delia?" The woman's mouth curled slightly at the corner. "So they still try to erase me. I shouldn't be surprised." Rae tried to gather herself. "Why are you here?" Delia leaned in, her tone low. "You're asking the wrong questions. Everyone keeps looking at what happened last month. But what about 3 years ago? Ask why he stopped sleeping, why his wife left. Ask what happened in Florence Memorial. Florence Memorial." Delia turned and began walking away. Rae took a step forward. "Wait, why should I believe you?" Delia paused. Without turning around, she said, "Because I buried the man he used to be." And then she was gone, blending into the crowded hallway like she had never been there. Back at her apartment, Rae typed Florence Memorial Psychiatric Wing into the court-authorized public records database. The search yielded nothing directly connected to Elliot Crane. No admissions, no medical claims. Clean as snow. Too clean. She dug deeper. She filtered by patients admitted under non-legal names. 2 entries from 3 years ago stood out. Same admission date, same discharge, flagged for executive-level confidentiality. Rae clicked one open. The scanned admission form was blurred except for a hand-signed consent at the bottom. The handwriting matched Elliot's court documents. He had been hospitalized under the alias E. Crossman. Diagnosis: delusional episodes, narcissistic rage, violent hallucinations. Discharge note: patient deemed medically stabilized after 8-day hold. Continued treatment recommended. Patient declined. Rae leaned back, stunned. Why wasn't this on record? How did this stay hidden during corporate background checks? And what did it mean? She scrolled further and found another entry: hospital bills, paid in full by a now-defunct shell corporation. She traced the account, the corporate owner? Peter Vale. The missing Lauer. Rae's blood ran cold. The same man who disappeared right before trial also managed Elliot's psychiatric silence. She stood and began pacing. Everything: the lawyer's absence, Elliot's obsessive control, even his unpredictability in court took on new meaning. It wasn't just about negligence. This case might be about concealment. About mental instability hidden from shareholders, from partners, from everyone. And suddenly a quiet question echoed in her head. What if the collapse wasn't an accident? The next day in court, Rae studied Elliot as he whispered to an advisor. His gestures too quick, his eyes too bright, his laugh too sharp when it came. He caught her watching. For a split second, the mask slipped. She saw it, a flicker of something frantic beneath the calm. Then he smiled, and Rae knew one thing with terrifying clarity. Delia hadn't come to warn her about Elliot's past. She had come to warn her about his future. The city was asleep, but Rae's mind wasn't. She clutched her bag tightly under her coat as she walked toward her car in the dim-lit courthouse library parking lot. Cold wind whistled through the trees, carrying echoes of her own footsteps. Back at her. She had just spent 5 straight hours digging into construction records, city permits, and shell company trails. She found a receipt dated a month before the collapse showing the concrete used was expired. Filed by a company Elliot once owned, and then headlights, a roar, tires screaming, a black SUV shot out from behind the courthouse, tires skidding. As it barreled straight toward her, Rae dropped her bag, stumbled backward, her ankle twisting as she hit the curb. The SUV veered just inches from her and disappeared into the night without stopping, breath ragged. She crawled to the sidewalk and stared into the emptiness where it vanished. It wasn't an accident. 2 hours later, back at her apartment, Rae found her front door ajar. She hesitated before pushing it open. Nothing looked broken, but something felt wrong. She went straight to the locked cabinet near her desk. Papers were missing. Her copies of the Florence Memorial files, Delia's warning notes, the forged building permits all gone, and on the wall, scrawled in thick black, "Marker over a mirror. Walk away." Her knees buckled. She slid down against the wall. Hand over her mouth. For a long time, she didn't move. The next morning, she showed up to court, pale but composed. Elliot was already seated, suited immaculately in charcoal gray. He glanced at her, tilted his head, and smiled like nothing had changed. After the recess, she approached him in the hallway. "You know anything about last night?" He didn't flinch. "You all right?" "I'm not asking if you care. I'm asking if it was you." He studied her carefully, like a man observing a flame too close to his curtains. "I don't get involved in theatrics," he said coolly. "But be careful, Rae. Some truths don't come with parachutes." She didn't blink. "I'm not the one falling." He smiled. "Aren't you?" That night, Rae sat in her car, parked outside Delia's last known address. She didn't have a plan, just desperation and a folder of photocopies she'd hidden in the glove compartment after the break-in. If someone was cleaning up the trail, she needed a backup. She needed someone who had already walked away and lived to warn her. But the mailbox was taped shut. The building manager confirmed. Delia moved out 3 days ago. Left no forwarding address. Rae stared at the empty apartment window and realized the trap wasn't just intimidation. It was erasure, piece by piece. Someone was deleting the evidence, covering tracks, cutting her off from all eyes. And if she stayed still, she'd be next. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she uploaded every digital file she had to an anonymous cloud drive, scheduled a timed release if anything happened to her. And then she opened a blank page on her laptop and typed the first line of her opening statement. "Your Honor, this case is not about wealth. It's about silence bought at the price of lives. Let them try to erase that." The courtroom was silent. Even the air seemed to hesitate as Rae Delgado rose from the defense table. Her knees were stiff, her throat dry, but her spine was straight. This was the moment that could define the rest of her life. She walked slowly to the center, the jury's eyes watching, waiting, some skeptical, others merely curious. No one expected the intern to still be standing. No one expected her to speak, but she did. Her voice, at first, was quiet but not weak. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about a building." She glanced toward the victims' families seated behind the prosecution. A mother clutched a necklace. A man's hands trembled on his cane. "This case is about silence." Rae paused. "Silence bought. Silence traded. Silence buried beneath concrete." She took a breath and continued, her words growing sharper. 5 months ago, the Florence Tower collapsed, killing 7 people. The prosecution will tell you it was due to criminal negligence by Mr. Elliot Crane's company. That corners were cut, warnings ignored. That profit came before human life. She turned, locking eyes with a juror. "What they won't tell you is how many hands signed off on those shortcuts, how many eyes looked away, how many voices were paid not to speak." Her heart raced, but her face remained composed. "I will present evidence that someone forged a critical safety permit. The signature wasn't Elliot Crane's, that the city inspector vanished weeks before the collapse, That whistleblower complaints never reached regulators because someone made sure they didn't. Ray's voice cracked slightly, just enough to sound human, and I will prove that the truth was buried not just in rubble, but in files, emails, bank records. And silence. She finished. I am not asking you to exonerate a man. I'm asking you to demand truth from a system that rewards secrets. That's what justice means. She stepped back. The judge nodded. The courtroom exhaled. And under the table Elliot reached for her hand. It was meant to be subtle, supportive. A gesture of thanks, of alliance. But Rae didn't take it. She gently pulled her hand away without looking at him. Because in that moment, something had shifted, not in the jury. In her. She wasn't sure she was defending him anymore. She wasn't sure she wanted to. And as she sat beside him again, pen in hand, her thoughts scattered like loose pages. Who forged the permit? Who paid off the inspector? Why did his sister disappear? Why did Rae Delgado from nowhere care this much? She felt his stare on her, but she didn't return it. Instead, she looked straight ahead as the prosecution rose to begin their opening. Remarks outside, rain tapped the windows like a quiet metronome. Each drop a countdown she couldn't yet interpret, but she knew one thing. If Elliot Crane had buried something, she was going to unearth it, even if she had to destroy her own case. To do it. The courtroom lights felt hotter than usual. Rae stood beside the witness stand, notepad in hand. But her eyes never left the man seated across from her, the project manager for the subcontracted firm that handled the Florence Towers construction. His badge read Turner Holt. Sweat traced a line down his temple. Mr. Holt, Rae said calmly, you testified that your company followed every safety protocol. Yes, he replied quickly. We complied with all inspection requirements. She nodded. And yet, she said, walking a slow arc toward the evidence screen, emails retrieved from your company's server show you instructed foremen to seal and fast-track certain floor inspections, even though reports hadn't been returned from the engineering review. The courtroom stirred. That's not what it means, Holt muttered. We were on a deadline. The wording was, Rae held up a copy of the email, projecting it on the screen behind him. Skip formal clearance on sublevel 12. No eyes, no questions. Crane's team wants ribbon cut by Thursday. Her voice was razor sharp. Is that your wording, Mr. Holt? He hesitated. It was dictated. Under pressure? From whom? I don't recall. Rae turned to the jury. No one recalls. Not the inspectors who disappeared. Not the CFO who resigned with a severance bonus, and now not the man whose name is on the order. She leaned forward. But 7 people are dead, and someone does remember. Someone profited. Someone looked away. Holt's silence was damning. The prosecutor stood for objection, but the judge overruled him. Continue, Ms. Delgado. Rae did calmly, brutally. She walked the jury through the collapsed sublevels blueprints, the mismatched rebar quantities, and the missing certification. Step by step, she laid bare the crumbling foundation, both of the building and the case itself. By the time she finished, Holt's face was pale. The jury was scribbling. The press was scribbling faster, and Elliot? Elliot Crane was smiling. That smug, practiced, politician smile. As if justice were a mirror reflecting only what he wanted to see, Rae stepped back to her table. Elliot leaned toward her. That was brilliant, he whispered. You just won the case. She didn't answer, because somewhere inside, something recoiled. She had defended him, yes, legally, but as she stared at the mother in the third row, the one whose son had died beneath steel and lies, Rae realized the truth wasn't as simple as guilt or innocence. The courtroom recessed. Outside in the hallway, reporters swarmed. Flashes, microphones, murmurs. Rae stood still in the chaos, eyes unfocused, replaying her words on loop. She hadn't defended a man, she defended a system, and Elliot Crane was still that system's golden son inside the defense chamber. She gathered her files. Elliot followed. I want you at the press conference, he said. Front row, I'll give you credit. You earned it. Rae turned slowly. Did I? She asked, voice low. He tilted his head. You doubt it? I don't doubt the law, she said, eyes narrowing. I doubt what you did with the time you were buying. He paused, the first hint of irritation flashing across his features. You saved me, Rae, he said. Let's not ruin the story. She stepped past him, fingers tightening around the folder in her hand. Maybe it was never mine to tell, she whispered as the courtroom lights dimmed behind her. She walked alone. Toward the city outside, its shadows, its sirens, and its truths. Rae sat on the cold courthouse bench, elbows on her knees, watching the rain smear against the windows like tears too stubborn to fall inside. The jury had been deliberating for over 3 hours. Outside, the city moved in slow-motion umbrellas. Folding, reporters pacing, security pacing faster. She hadn't touched her coffee. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her thoughts hadn't. Every step of this trial had left a bruise on her clarity. Her morals, her sense of justice, footsteps, she didn't need to look up to know it was Elliot. He walked slowly, the solace of his Italian shoes barely making a sound on the marble. A man who had once owned the room now carried his silence like a weapon. He stopped beside her. I meant what I said, he murmured, voice low. I want you on my legal team, permanently. She finally turned to face him. His jaw was tight, but there was something softer in his eyes, hope, maybe. Or calculation. You don't want someone like me near your truth, she said, each word weighted with unsaid things. Not when I'm still figuring out if I help save a man or bury a lie. He didn't flinch, just exhaled, then nodded, as if expecting that answer. You're better than this system, Rae, he said. No, she replied. I just refuse to let it swallow me, the bailiff called from down the hallway. Verdict's in. Elliot didn't move at first. Then, without a word, he walked toward the courtroom. Alone, Rae stood seconds later, steadied herself, and followed. Not because she wanted to, but because she needed to know what justice would look like today in this room, under this roof of procedure and performance. Inside, the gallery was packed. Cameras pointed like rifles. Reporters scribbled. Victims' families clutched one another. Rae stood behind Elliot, her hands clasped tightly. The judge entered. The foreperson rose. In the matter of the people versus Elliot Crane on the charge of criminal negligence resulting in death, how does the jury find? A pause that cracked the room in half. Not guilty. Gasps, a few sobs. One person clapped and was immediately shushed. Elliot exhaled like a man finally allowed to breathe. His legal advisor behind him touched his shoulder. A camera flashed. Rae didn't move. The judge dismissed the court. Reporters surged toward Elliot. Rae stepped out through the side door, unnoticed. Outside. The rain had stopped. The sky, however, remained gray, as if the city itself couldn't decide if it had just witnessed justice or manipulation. She stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the city. Footsteps again. Quicker this time. It was Delia Crane, Elliot's estranged sister, watching from across the street. Their eyes met for a moment. Delia gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked away. The case was over, but the story wasn't. Rae walked in the opposite direction. The courthouse stood still in the morning fog, tall, cold, indifferent as always. Rae passed it without slowing her stride. She didn't need to. The building was burned into her memory, every floor, every bench, every echo of arguments wrapped in law and soaked in silence. A crowd was gathering outside. Another high-profile case, a different scandal, different camera crews. Same chaos. She tucked her hands in the pockets of her worn blazer and kept walking, unnoticed this time. She preferred it that way now. It had been 4 months since the verdict. 4 months since she walked away from Elliot Crane without looking back. He was everywhere again, smiling from the cover of business magazines, shaking hands at charity galas, quoted as a man who overcame injustice. His company's stock had tripled. He was planning a new skyscraper. Justice had cleared his name, but Rae knew better. Justice cleared facts, not conscience. She pushed open the heavy glass doors of the legal aid clinic where she now worked. A low, cramped office across town. No marble floors, no polished wood. Just flickering lights, mismatched chairs, and clients who couldn't afford lies. She liked it here. It didn't pretend to be clean. Inside, a teenage girl sat waiting, nervous, hands clenched. Her landlord was threatening eviction. Rae smiled gently and led her into the back room, offering water and calm. The work was slower now, less glory, no applause. But it mattered. After her last session that evening, Rae paused by the window. Across the street, a digital billboard flashed an ad for Elliot's newest venture, a tech-integrated luxury shelter, solving homelessness through innovation. The tagline read, She shook her head. He always knew how to dress the wound without cleaning it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elliot Crane. He's lobbying for judicial reform now. Figures, Rae typed, then erased. Then just sent a thumbs up. The streetlights flickered on. The courthouse was just barely visible in the distance. Same as always, towering. Cold. She thought about that final day in court, the look Elliot gave her when the verdict was read. Not gratitude, not relief. Control. He had survived again. But not unchanged. And neither had she. Rae took a notebook from her drawer and scribbled something on the first page. Not all verdicts are justice. Some are just good performances. She closed it, locked it in her drawer. And turned off the lights. Outside, the city buzzed with noise and spin. But inside her quiet world, the truth still breath-draw, unpolished, and untouched by camera lenses. She didn't save a man. She didn't bury him either. She just walked the line between the two. And now she knew justice doesn't come free. It costs peace. It costs certainty. It costs a piece of you. But Rae Delgado had made peace with that price, and in a world of winners and survivors, she chose something else. To remember. And to keep going.